and he begins to take us higher from the mundane and public. As we meander through the vast details and the frontiers of Mahapatra's highly suggestive and evocative poetry, negotiating the boundaries, multiplicities, and the perfect blending of tradition and modernity, we can definitely look forward to a very interesting and insightful session with Professor Priyan. So over to Professor.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I'll have a brief introduction of our speaker colleague. Professor Ram Niyal is a highly accomplished professor with extensive experience in the field of English literature and related studies, with a PhD from Harvard University, UK, and a diverse range of specializations, including 20th century literature, women and literature, post-colonial studies. She has made significant contributions to academia. Professor Ranu has been honored with the prestigious awards such as the Commonwealth Scholarship and the UBC Visiting Associate Award. Additionally, she holds various honorary positions, including being a board member for PISON, a center for people with disabilities, and serving as chief editor for Rhetorica Quarterly, a literary journal. Her leadership roles extend to serving as the former head of Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Lucknow, and as the director of the Institute of Women's Studies. Through her extensive involvement in academic committees and boards, Professor Ranu has demonstrated her commitment to advancing scholarship in her field. Professor Ranu is a prolific academic and writer with a wealth of publications across various mediums. She has authored and edited books, anthologies, and contributed reviews to esteemed journals and published numerous papers on literature, culture, and gender issues. Her work reflects a deep engagement with English literature and cultural.
In 2007-8, he is admitted to PGI Lucknow. I get a call from a doctor in PGI saying he's asking for me. My husband and I rush to PGI, and that becomes our daily routine for as long as he's there. His son Mohan is by his side, a young Mahapatra with a lively sense of humor, talking about his stay in Singapore. Once Jayenda is discharged, he keeps his promise the last Sunday, his last day in PGI, and he comes home to spend the day with my family. That is the time when he relished the parathas prepared by Navan. It was a day full of laughter, admiration and awe, and a few of my research students were also invited to join. Awestruck by the poet's simplicity and his magnanimity, his childlike charm, they would hang on to every word and smile of his. And thus began a sharing of letters, writing of poems. He loses Runu Bhabi, his wife, who incidentally was a student at IT college. She did her graduation from there. And Jayendra informed me about her demise. And this is what he wrote in that solemn note: frail figure, lost forever. And somewhere there was this deep guilt within him that he could not look after her properly. This is followed by the sad and untimely demise of his son, Mohan, who died of cancer. Jayendra embraces loneliness with a quiver. Then, 2017, he visited the English department at the University of Lucknow for a poetry reading, which was a huge success. You see, in the present times, that is, with so much of uncertainty and fear around us, poetry helps us heal our broken hearts and tainted minds. And it is often to poetry that we turn to whenever there is Daihik, Davik, Bhautik, Tapa. Tap leads to Santap. And poets often find relief in words. Words that bind, words that connect, and heal are the words that we must use. I quote from a letter which was his first letter that he wrote to me sometime in 1991. And in that first letter, Jayendra said, "You are so young and fragile. The world is heartless. Do look after yourself." Mahapatra, and those words of his, they've stayed with me because I realized over the years that yes, world is indeed heartless. Mahapatra sees the world with an eye that feels. He loved Orissa. He always, whenever he went abroad, he craved to return to India after every sojourn. He travels but returns in haste to the sounds and shapes familiar to his heart. His soul resides in India, but he is deeply pained and ashamed of a world devoid of justice and kindness. He is critical of hands wielding power and is moved by the plight of those on the margins. Sand and stones, fish and fowl, crows and carcasses, history of hunger and hands, women and whales, dance and dawn, gulls and grass, rivers and ruins, earth and evil, dusk and deprivation, beasts, body and bellies, rain and rights. The suburban sprawl, the neglected ruins, the churches and the temples, all this makes him the poet of the unsung countryside and unheard lives. He is conscious of the pain of poor and the fervor of youth, the helplessness of an ordinary farmhand, the wastage of human endeavors. And of all his books, it is in random descent we find that the poet Mahapatra is significant for many reasons. First and foremost, it is his entire oeuvre is built upon a very strong national consciousness. He primarily writes about his own country and people. And secondly, he addresses issues that concern humanity. Surrounded by images of despair, disease, distrust, it is unlikely that a poet of his sensitivity would remain quiet over issues of communalism, environmental degradation, or violence against the weak and subjugated. His haunting disquiet and his compulsion to write are palpable in all his works, as I quote from his poem of storytelling. These days, I rarely look into my own eyes. I just allow things to happen gently, like allowing the awareness of another's existence to beat out the passage of time and not to force my instinctive rancor into the mirror and trap myself in my nakedness. If on one hand, self-doubt weighs heavily in the background, it is equally crippling for the same self to be in the midst of happiness, to be in the midst of debilitating forces that seem to have the capacity to destroy all chances of happiness and survival. Mahapatra, one of the most prominent poets of Indian writing in English, many collections to his credit. He has also done 10 to 12 translations of poetry. He taught physics at Ravenshaw College. Therefore, as a physicist, his work is marked with scientific precision and an artist's vision. Orissa remained his major backdrop against which he created images of hunger, disillusionment, followed by laughter and light. The poet never failed to express his anger at contemporary situation in India. He's angry that he's part of a landscape within inverted commas where hate flutters like a wounded slag, and with chagrin disparagingly writes a critique of a place, quote, where death can go on proclaiming its vanity. He writes about the present with a message for the future. In his verse, he speculates about the India that is and the country that he would want it to be. And as a poet of despair, he still has immense faith in human capacity for survival and change. His brave and intriguing self, in moment of confession, chooses a postmodernist stance. Quote, in those crumpled eyes of hers, the light of death goes on gathering shadows, and I feel I am late with my life. You see, post-colonial concerns situate the body of his own, where the disparity between the real and the ideal is consciously portrayed. The paradigm shifts determine the efforts to retrieve and return to one's origins, and Mahapatra makes a very conscious choice. His voice splits over the Indian landscape, and the language that he uses is concomitant with the experience. The indigenous becomes universal, and the marginalized traverses the globe to become central. Writing is a process. It is a discipline. The poetry of Mahapatra incorporates time as an essential motive for change. I was a time acquired out of the pages of time, he says, and silence becomes an only possibility in an inescapable darkness. The poet is constantly trying to replace complacency with action, struggling to free and to hoping to steady the hour through his verse. It is interesting to note that Mahapatra's voice is essentially caught up with the unbearable disappointments and the need to grapple with the restless chaos of this world. Painfully aware of the swiftly declining atmosphere, his is a voice conscious of a sense of doom. It lacks the ironic ferment so characteristic of Ezekiel. Like him, Ezekiel too chose to speak of man and his relation to the world, but Ezekiel's outrage was punctuated with laughter, which is a rare feat indeed. Mahapatra doesn't laugh. Another Indian poet who shares the predilections of her age and was a contemporary of Mahapatra is Kamla Das. Das's poetry celebrates the joy of becoming in the heat and mire of the Indian landscape, and we see how deep within her frustrations and anger is a love of life and a passion for the unknown. And it is this richness of a sensuous obsession that sets up in motion the flesh and blood exuberance so vital to individual creativity. Mahapatra said, for me, physics and poetry are not at odds with each other. They work towards the same direction, towards discovery, leading to achieving a sense of wonder. He was more drawn to the kinds of pain that loss can produce. Imagine his 22nd collection at the age of 95, just a few months before his death. And it is said that while he was battling for his last breath in the hospital, he still wanted to have a look at the final copy of Chandradhaga, which he edited every year. We are living in an age when people are talking of a burnout syndrome at 40. Here is Mahapatra, whose first book of poems came out when he was in his early 40s. So I must say that there is still scope for us, poets, writers, and teachers who are going through the midlife crisis. By inserting familiar and the mundane into his verse, Mahapatra has given us an immensely rich poetry. By linking the inner and the outer landscape, he transcends the temporal. I quote from his poem, another love poem. Another love poem. In a country drugged with its image, I only find my way in metaphor. Fear points me out on the streets wherever I go. An important poem, which is perhaps the most anthologized and talked about, is the poem Grandfather, and people have discussed it at length in the morning sessions also. I quote, did you hear the young tamarind leaves rustle in the cold green nights of your belly? With a question mark. Did you see your own death? सुनी क्या तुमने जवान इमली के पत्तों की थरथराहट, पेट की ठंडी कठोर रातों में? क्या तुमने देखी अपनी मौत? Torn and moth-eaten diary in vernacular was the only possession left behind by his grandfather. We all know that Chintamani Mahapatra converted to Christianity, and conversion became a strategy of integration, of survival, and also of otherness. It is a poem that kept me awake at night when I was writing it, said Mahapatra. And in the same poem, there is this question: how old were you? Hunted. You turned coward and ran. You left your family behind. What did fate matter? What Hindu word so ancient and true for you to quote? Why? Because the separate life let you survive. Conversion as a strategy of integration is secondary to the experience of survival and lack of living. The terrible famine faced by his grandfather forced him to embrace Christianity, and at the same time, he had to undergo excommunication. The man who taught physics at a college in Qatar, the man who wrote poems, the man who shed tears at every act of injustice, the man whose grandfather converted to Christianity due to poverty, hunger, the man who loved his soil, his country, and wrote about those on the margins. Which Mahapatra should we talk about? He is all in one. A poet, friend, physicist, father, lover of people, passionate about his state, proud of his cultural heritage, and full of pain for those who are dispossessed and deprived. For me, Mahapatra is a man in love with life, but also in love with despair, burning with a sense of helplessness for his inability to make this world a better place where love and compassion reign, hopes flourish, and dreams thrive. He, as a poet, enriched many lives with his verse and verve, his kindness and knowledge, his care and compassion. He created a unique idiom in Indian English poetry. Look at hunger. I quote, I heard him say, my daughter, she's just turned 15. Feel her. I'll be back soon. Your bus leaves at 9. मैंने उसे ये कहते सुना, मेरी बेटी अभी सिर्फ 15 की हुई है, उसे महसूस करो, मैं जल्द ही लौटूंगा, तुम्हारी बस 9 बजे छूटेगी. And the last phrase, fish slithering, turning inside, मछली थरथराई, भीतर पलट गई. You and I become aware like the tourist in the poem and realize the sensitivity of a poet who breaks the stereotypes, regains his humanism in favor of the deprived. He writes about an intimate experience that he has been a part of, and the poem gradually draws us all in. The internal structure of the poem has a pervasive quality that rips apart the world of the Bhadralok. If the early Indian poetry in English rejoiced in respectful allegiance to the Romantics and the Victorians, post-independence Indian poetry in English, primarily that of Mahapatra, John Murray, Ramanujan, and Polatkar, has turned its gaze inwards and pays close attention to its own climate and ethos. If Kamla speaks of endless female hungers, Mahapatra does not hesitate to point his finger at endless social inequities. In this age of distrust and insatiable despair, the entire humanity seems to have been trapped between the two battles, the battle between Eros, the god of love, who beckons us to move on, while Thanatos, the god of death, is merciless and indiscriminate as he pulls the trigger. An outpouring of tributes, seminars, anthologies is a sign of an overwhelming admiration for the poet Mahapatra. Much has been written and said about Mahapatra and his poetry, his late entry, and it was West that recognized him first, picked his early birth, and ensured, it is West, I repeat, that ensured his formidable presence in the Indian literary landscape. Mahapatra's finely composed verse shakes us with his sharp, penetrating eye that captures the most innocuous details of everyday life, be it a rain of lights, which with its, I quote, like some shape of conscience I cannot look at, a malignant purpose in a nerve's eye, unquote. We see the dawn of a new self, the questioning self, deplores the state of deprivation and denial. And remember one of the poems wherein he talks of white clad widowed women past the center of their lives, hanging by the dawn's shining strands of faith. For Mahapatra, social injustice and gender discrimination are major concerns that need to be addressed in society. Mahapatra builds up the contrast that lies between this inner and outer landscape. I quote from his poem, A Tree. In my room, the day neither wakes nor sleeps. On my desk, a pin falls in the middle of a breath. The mood is somber, and the evocative imagery of the tree stands as a sentinel. There is something of Rekai in these lines that stir human emotions, a world where seasons plunge into a delight of sorts. The bleakness of the clouds takes us by surprise. Every season here droops into its shabby nest. At the touch of stone, the immensity becomes your own. He saw death as an inevitable condition bound to happen. Old that he was and the misfortunes that he bore, he survived because of his love for poetry. Poetry kept him going. Poetry was his life and breath, and he wrote till he died. His mind remained active to all the subtleties of existence. He wrote because poetry was his passion. It was his rise or death. He knew to be able to survive in this heartless world, he must give his heart to poetry and to people, and it kept him going. I conclude with a poem that's from my own collection, and the title of this poem is In Conversation with Jayan Mahapatra. Youthful and vivacious is how he described me when we first met at Canterbury. 15 years later, it seems almost a century, but one rarely goes that far. A husband and a child, a house and a permanent assignment, it all seems to have gone according to plan. Having put on a few more extra kilos, the skin with an air of severity, voice harsh, and mind running with unpaid bills, time's relentless pursuit of love and soul, we laugh together with each other at each other. In the midst of tears, handshakes, hugs, and comradeship rings his bemused assurance. This has nothing to do with the change in you. The insular strain of a householder has left its mark on you. Thank you.
Thank you for the lecture. Now I would like to open for question and answers. So, if you want to after this. If you want to questions, please. Please take your some
Yes.
Mm.
You see, he was published in most of the magazines from US and England. 70 reviews. Pardon? Yes, Poetry Chicago, 70 reviews. Yes. And other magazines as well. Was one of them.
Yeah. So basically,
One was yes.
It's like Mahabharata is the exact position for next before we get to the and the politics of poetry also.
Fiction.
Anyone else? So, it has continued. This is what Ekaraman says in that one common scale of sections on large house. That's anything recognized in the West, we can be the Ramanujan, the Napa. This is something we need to change. I don't know when this will happen, but maybe we are on that path. That path will become that hard.
I think things are much better in Bengal and while you're talking of the clearinghouse connected, I feel that people in the north they should all join hands together and encourage poetry sessions, poetry things, and more of such interaction because it's very true what Professor Devi said this morning that there are hardly any seminars focusing on poetry because therefore, and even in terms of research, very few people, very few students are encouraged to use poetry for higher study.
Yeah. One of the reasons why Indian poetry is not very seriously less often here because it's hardly otherwise maybe you are available that foundation of competition. And as an answer then so we look for people not the West. Even a minor person like this to write something that becomes something very big. Otherwise, when I look at books, it was even books nothing. Right? And even today, if you try to find out the nature, it is hardly anything mentioned by anyone. That the people work like this, all of people. And this was what continuing to but very difficult to get so how to change this situation? And when I discussed with you that my and when I said so,
I think I would disagree with my partner here because all that he said about despair and disinterest, he was one of the poets to receive maximum acclaim and respect and admiration of his common readers, you know. And the amount of work you already mentioned that there are about more than 2,000, 4,000 on him. So how can you say that we have not been looked at and looked at more? No. Yes.
that what really said. Writing on poetry is very challenging compared to writing on other genres. And I just quote one remark by one of the very important professors. He usually told us it's amazing. He said, When you start studying poetry, this is how they are retiring. And actually, we went to Kumar that because at the end of the career, that he is ready for that he develops and the certification of the poetry. So to say something worthwhile. So then I was reading lots of things and found that all this which I read, so usually it was in the nature of picking up one or two points from poetry, maybe one or two telling images. So there is that those images of a poem where you have a poem of 8 lines or 10 lines and you have to connection in 20 pages. That is that requires and what you see. Crystal on poetry, not entirely it's on other languages. I have a feeling that most of the people that is there now is mostly derivative to this. There's hardly any originality within that piece. It first needs to think about that. That what is it that is going to create that originality in our thinking to where we are able to make our own assessments without any derivative. The derivative part is there everywhere. Every going and where is it that we have our original way of thinking and analyzing? Something maybe the normal of education doesn't encourage that because they may be sort of learn by rote rather than involved. So that has to come at that level with you, whether it matters only when you find our own independent assistance.
I think the teachers have not been trained to adequately handle the tools of poetry. When it comes to
And we are now in the chair of the session. Now, this is the bathroom area that आपको के बीच में तो इस बाथरूम के लिए जैसा कि सभी बात बहुत जरूरी है और इसके काम में होता है या उस तरह की बातचीत नहीं करते हैं अगर हम इसकी कवरेज करते हैं तो बहुत लाइक की बहुत बड़ी बातचीत नहीं कर पाते क्योंकि इंग्लिश पर बातचीत करते हैं अगली बात जो ये होगी कि हमारे यहाँ जो कुछ नहीं हुआ मैं समझता हूँ कि डिसिप्लिन की एक व्यवस्था हो सकती है लेकिन ये एक तरह से इस पूरे परिवेश की व्यवस्था नहीं हो सकती क्योंकि नहीं देखा जाए तो हमारे यहाँ हिंदी को पूरी बातचीत कविता के लिए होती है कोई भी उससे चल रही है इतिहास की पूरी धारा और हमारे पूरे काम में हिंदी के ज्यादातर और पुराने सारे काम हिंदी में तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि कवियों को लेकर के खूब सारी बातें जो भारतीय जो कालशास्त्र की परंपरा है मुझे लगता है कि पाश्चात्य कालशास्त्र परंपरा के भी पूरी जमीन में कविता ही है लंबे समय तक को गौर कर तो क्या ऐसा हो सकता है या इसकी क्या गुंजाइश बढ़ती है कि जैन महाभारत का जिस तरह के जो हमारे कवि रहे जो भारतीय पंडित कार्य अंग्रेजी में लिखना शुरू किया तो क्या जो हिंदी की कविता है या भारतीय भाषाओं की कविता इसके अच्छे अच्छे कवियों का अच्छा नाम उनको दिया अंग्रेजी में लिखा जाना या उस में जाना ये उनको कल्पना करता है कि भारतीय कल्चर जाना या जब जो पूरे यूरोपियन लैंग्वेज और लिटरेचर के जब यहाँ के आदमी लगातार चल रहा है उनके ढेर सारे सम्मान मिल रहे खूब सारी बातचीत हो रही है लेकिन हमारी प्रकाश ये बातचीत और ये बहस और ये काम और क्रिटिकल करनी है ये क्यों नहीं हो पा रही है या जैसे कहा कि क्या ये संख्या पर है या बच्चों की संख्या पर है या कम हो जैसे कि हिंदी में बहुत अंग्रेजी बोलते हैं या जानते हैं तो क्या ये की वजह से है या हम इस पर ध्यान नहीं दे रहे हैं इस तरह की ज्यादा नहीं क्या कारण
देखिए महाभाषा का जहाँ तक सवाल है वो द्विभाषी करनी थी वो सिर्फ अंग्रेजी में नहीं लिखते थे उड़िया में भी लिखते थे लेकिन खास बात ये थी कि उनको अपने ही लोगों ने उड़िया करने की वजह से बहुत बार में सुधारा है शुरू में जब लिखना के ऊपर शोध भी काफी हुई है। तो ये कोई बहुत लंबी बहस का मुद्दा है कि अगर अंग्रेजी लिख रहे हैं तो क्या कारण है कि लोग जो है उनके ऊपर काम नहीं हो रहा है। यहाँ पर मेरे पास क्वालिटी ऑफ वर्क की भी कमी, क्योंकि जहाँ तक लिखने का सवाल है बहुत लोग लिख रहे हैं, लेकिन क्या लिख रहे हैं ये भी बहुत ऐसा लिख रहे हैं। ये बहुत जरूरी है कि आप लिखना तो हर कोई कलम उठा के लिखता है और छपे छापने की भी कई तरीके हैं, मुद्रा है अपने आप में एक अलग है, लेकिन मुझे लगता है जो अच्छी कविता है, जो एक सार गर्भित लेख है, या फिर जो कविता दिल को छू के जाती है, वो चाहे किसी भी भाषा में लिखी जाए, उसका कोई विज्ञापन करे ना करे, वो जब भी किसी सक्रिय पाठक के हाथों में जाती है तो वो एक अपना प्रभाव छोड़कर जाती है। उसको फिर पढ़े बिना नहीं रह सकता। पाठकों को भी कोई एक कविता जो है अपनी यात्रा स्वयं तय करती है, उसको कवि का काम नहीं कि अपनी यात्रा तय करना, कविता की यात्रा स्वयं तय करती है। The journey is to be decided by the poem, not the poet.
लेकिन एक बात मैं जैन बार बार इस बात को कहा कि अंग्रेजी मेरी बहुत मजबूत थी, लेकिन उड़िया में मैं लिखता था कविता, मेरे पास शब्द नहीं होते। इसका भी ध्यान रखना है कि एक्चुअली को काम वर्ती कविता की उड़िया में जैसे दूसरे लोग लिख रहे हैं, जैसे उड़िया की मुख्य धारा के कवि वो जैसा लिख रहे हैं, क्योंकि मेरे पास और ये बहुत सारे लोगों के साथ ये हुआ। मुझे याद है ये जो बहुत समय तक अंतिम 10 वर्षों में उन्होंने हिंदी उपन्यासों का विवेचन करना शुरू किया। प्रेमचंद को खासतौर से कहा जीवन करता है व्यर्थ गया, तो व्यर्थ होने से जितना बचाना है उसके लिए मैं भारतीय साहित्य पढ़ रहा हूँ। ये उन्होंने बहुत बाद में तो प्रेमचंद का लंबा लेख जा रहा है, जिसमें आएगा तो आएगा, क्योंकि अभी लगता है अपनी जड़ों की ओर लो। दे रही दोपहर तो उनका रहा, लेकिन भाषा के स्तर पर वो उनको मराठी नहीं आती, महाराष्ट्र मेरे पूर्वज 2000 साल से रह रहे हैं, लेकिन मराठी नहीं आती, मुझे मराठी उनको सीखने का संकट नहीं था, लेकिन ये दूसरी वाला बैच था। अंग्रेजी उनके लिए बस मदर टंग की तरह से थी, उड़िया एक तरह से अदर टंग की तरह से नंबर 2 पर आई, जो बहुत सारे कवियों में अक्सर नहीं।
Professor Unia's erudite and illuminating talk evidently had given us enough food for thought. Now, I would like to thank our eminent speaker, Professor Ranu Unia, for the brilliant talk delivered at this session. Please give a big round of applause for our distinguished guest. Reminiscing about her long association with Jain Mahapatra and rummaging through nostalgic memories, Professor Unia made some very valid observations on how Mahapatra sought relief through words, his strong national consciousness, and the empathy with which he addressed issues concerned with pain and sorrow. He never fails to express his anger towards injustice and As a poet of despair, he has infinite faith in the future. About language, he said that when language fails, poetry fails. Grappling with the restless chaos of society, he was in love with life. Physics and poetry harmonize perfectly in his poetry. His care and compassion are incomparable. He retained his humanism despite innumerable personal debilitating afflictions that he suffered. So that should bring us to the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Now I would like to invite Dr. after the technical section. Thank you. Thank you, Shubham. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Ram Punyalji for her gracious presence and for sharing her pearls of wisdom with us. Ma'am truly deserves a big round of applause for her. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. I am grateful to Professor Indrani Mukherjee for chairing the session and for giving concluding remarks. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Of course, she also deserves a big round of applause. And I would like to mention here that this seminar would not have seen the day of the light without the able guidance of our chairperson, Professor Sushil Kumar Sharma. And I think that he also deserves a big round of applause. I extend my thanks to all the participants for making this seminar a grand success. All of us know that it's time to high tea. We have made arrangements for tea in the Department of English. Let's continue this intellectual activity over tea. Thank you very much. Let's call it a day. Thank you. All right, let's go. We are going to the we have a technical session after tea. Yeah, I have told you, I've been saying that we have made arrangements for you in the Department of English. After tea, we will have a technical session. So look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.